Hello, RDs and RDs to be. Welcome to the RD Exam Ready podcast. My name is Zak Kaesberg. I'm your tutor, your coach, your guide along the path to passing the CDR exam. My biggest passion is to help RDs and RDs to be just like you, to know how to effectively pass this exam. If that sounds like you, then hey, you're in the right place. I want you to think back to the worst job you've ever had. It may have been the nature of the job, could have been the people you worked with, could have been the leader that you had in that case. I'd say that last point is one reason why a lot of people feel dissatisfied in their job is they don't feel like that they liked their leader. Leadership is very similar to that of management styles, where you're trying to find the best way to motivate employees to get the job done. But independent of how you get people to do the job is how you are as yourself as a leader and how you lead others. Today, we're going to take some time to discuss more of these leadership styles, going through autocratic, laissez faire, democratic leaders, their differences. We're going to go along the continuum of leadership styles, discussing leaders who are exploitive, benevolent, consultative, and participative, and also discuss the leadership grid, going through impoverished all the way to opportunistic leaders to see which style fits with each different type of leader in a different situation. After today, I hope that you're going to understand the different elements of leadership, leadership styles, theories, and the differences in purposes for each of the different styles that exist out there. Leadership, by itself, is the process of influencing the activities of an individual or group of employees to try and achieve the organizational goals. A leadership position comes with a level of power and authority over others. This is how leaders can influence the behavior of employees or those that they're working with. Power is something you use. There's position power, which is power that is derived just from you having the position that you have, such as being the CEO. The CEO has positional power over pretty much everyone in the organization. But there's also personal power, which comes from your personal attributes, your expertise as a leader, and there are different forms of power that I want you to be familiar with for different leaders. We're going to go through each different type of power that exists. We have legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power, referent power, aka charisma, informational power, and connection power. These are all different powers that leaders can exhibit over those that they work above. As you think of each of these, I want you to think about the first word that comes before power. This is going to help to guide you and learn to understand what each of these different types of power structures means. I want to start out with an easy example. Let's talk about reward power. Reward power is when you hear that term, what do you really think of in terms of what a leader is basing what they do off of? They're using the power of being able to reward others, hence why it's called reward power. Reward power is the leader's ability to reward others using things like pay, promotions, or favorable job assignments. These are all ways that a leader can use their power to influence others in what they're doing by giving them rewards. You see, reward power applies to rewards. Take that same mindset as you go through each of these different power structures and terms. Make sure not to overthink it here. Legitimate power is very similar to that of positional power that I just talked about a minute ago. The leader holds this positional power, this formal position, and because they hold that position, they tend to use that power to influence others to achieve objectives. An example of this would be if a manager is telling a staff to clean the dry storage room, they're telling the staff member to clean the storeroom because they are a manager, they have legitimate power, and they can tell the employee what to do based on that. There's also expert power, which is a bit different. Expert power is one where the leader is being viewed as an expert, knowledgeable, and competent in their job. This type of leader likely worked their way from the bottom to the top of their position. They have a really great knowledge base of the tasks, the procedures that are needed to be done. And because of that influence, they can go and influence others to do those same skills, complete the jobs. And they're basing this all off of their own knowledge that they have. They've developed respect amongst all the employees that they lead. And because they have that respect, that's why people will follow them. Referent power, aka charisma, is the power that a leader exhibits based on being well liked and admired. They can influence their power because people like them and admire them as a leader. All of those ones sound pretty positive in general to me, but let's add in a few negatives here. Coercive power. If English is your second language, you may or may not know what the word coercive means. So, coercive means it's something negative, means to influence others to do the job by any means necessary. They'll do things like intimidate others, they'll threaten them, they'll give them undesirable work assignments to induce compliance. It's kind of like a negative reinforcement or a way to punish people using the power that you have. Now, informational power is used by leaders because the other employees know that the leader has information that they need. So, the way they use their power and influence is because they have access to information, access to tools that maybe other people don't get. And lastly, we have connection power. Connection power is where the leader is basing it based on the connections inside or outside the organization. This leader induces compliance from others who also want to gain favor and stay in an influential connection. So, that last one is going to be the connection power. Of all of these power structures that we discussed, the ones that are most positive and related to employee satisfaction and performance would be the powers of expert and referent. Okay. So, say that back with me one more time. For employee satisfaction and performance together, you would want to focus on expert and referent powers. That kind of makes sense, right? You want someone with good expertise and you want them to be well likable. So, this is going to keep your employees nice and happy for who they work with, and also happy because they actually know what they're doing in that case, right? If we would like to kind of look at the different levels of employees, if I want to be negative, or if I want my employees to be dissatisfied or have low satisfaction in the job, you know which power I'm going to use? The negative one. I'm going to use my coercive powers if I want my employees to be dissatisfied, not happy, things like that. Okay. Because if I'm going to be intimidating or firing people, threatening them, that's kind of use of my coercive power to get people to do things. And yeah, it's not going to make people too happy. Now, finally, for compliance, for sticking to and meeting the goals and the objectives of the organization, we would look at our expert and legitimate powers. Those two would be the most important for compliance in the workplace. Whereas if I want performance and employees satisfied, I'm going to be looking at my referent powers and I'm going to be looking at my expert power together. So you can see the last one is more of competence in the workplace, but the first one is happy employees. Okay. Next, we're going to introduce a few different leadership styles, not to be mixed up with management styles, which are meant to find ways to motivate employees to do the job, whereas leadership styles are more focused on how you lead other people. Now, in a previous episode, I've talked through management and leadership just a little bit, and I introduced McGregor's Theory X, Y, and Z, and these are going to be different leadership styles that you're going to need to know for the exam. McGregor's Theory X and Y really talks about how there is two types of managers and leaders, the negative, Theory X, and the positive, Theory Y. What Theory X and Y is focused on is we can kind of use some examples. It's all about how managers perceive their employees. There's one thought that if you have to motivate your employees or lead your employees through fear, through close surveillance, through really sticking to those organizational objectives to be obtained, then you're going to be using Theory X. Okay. Theory X is when you're going to be using things like intimidation, authoritarian type mindset when you're approaching employees, because you always keep thinking, well, employees don't like to work, so I need to motivate them through more of an authoritarian lens. Conversely, Theory Y is focused on by allowing employees to experience personal satisfaction and be self-directed. It's the thought that employees love work. They don't need to be constantly pestered to get more work done. They're more happy and more satisfied when they're self-directed. Theory X, like I said, tends to be more autocratic or authoritarian. Theory Y tends to be more participative. I do want to add too about Theory Z, which is Oichi. In this, employees are seen as the greatest asset with mutual employee to employer loyalty. Everyone is to be involved in the decision making in an OICHI setting. This is widely used in Japan, and that's where it's become popular. Another basic concept is how leaders make decisions. Responsibility for decision making is a key factor in differentiating a few of these different leadership styles. What I'm going to introduce here is the three basic decision making styles of autocratic, laissez faire, and democratic type decision makers. It's all centered about how a leader involves the employees in the decision making process. And when you think about autocratic, what comes to mind? Well, I tend to think of a very authoritarian Theory X type of leader in this case. If you were to guess that Theory X autocratic authoritarian, do you think that they're very interested in the employee's opinion? Yes or no? Well, no, right? That is not going to be someone who's very interested in the employee's opinion. Autocratic leadership styles would mean that the leaders themselves are going to make most of the decisions, and they're not really involving the other lower level employees to get their opinions or their thoughts on it. Now, the complete opposite of that style would be the laissez faire. Laissez faire would mean let them do it. This is where the leader is letting the group make decisions, okay? So the group themselves is making the decision, not the leader. Totally opposite from our other side. The third type is probably the best blend, which would be the democratic leader. Democracy, you have these people where you vote, and then we look at a group majority decision, right? That is what a democratic leader is doing. They are guiding and encouraging the group to make the decision together. So the leader will still have involvement in the group decision, but they're trying to guide others towards making that decision. Yes, we learn about leaders. We've certainly learned about different styles. We can also learn about different behaviors of leaders and how they fit into an effective leadership style. You may have heard of a Likert scale when we talk about evaluation of food. A Likert scale in food evaluation is like a scale from 1 to 5, saying 1 is I really dislike this food and 5 is I really love this food, right? Now, we also have Likert in the case of management, but it's completely unrelated to what you know about food testing. The person developed this different model. The Likert situation kind of says that what we're looking at here is there's this continuum of leadership styles under Likert, okay, from autocratic to participative based on research. The proposed management or leadership styles you have here are going to be one, exploitive autocratic, two, benevolent autocratic, three, consultative, and four, participative. These should be ringing a bell a little bit here. Three, two, one. When you're trying to exploit someone, what are you trying to do? Exploitive autocratic management style is a style in which the manager operates by fear, threats, and punishment, and almost all decisions are made by the top level of management. As you can see, this fits very well with autocratic, authoritarian, or Theory X type styles, so it's okay if you associate those together. The second one proposed was the benevolent autocratic. Okay. Now, if you don't know what benevolent means you want to be giving and rewarding. That's what benevolent means. Okay. Now, benevolent in this case, this type of leader is still operating on an autocratic style. That's why it's still going to be called the benevolent autocratic. Okay. So they're still operating in an autocratic style. They're still making the majority of decisions. However, they do still give gifts and rewards. Okay, so there's still some levels of threats and punishment are still pretty normal. It's just that may give more small rewards compared to that of the exploitive autocratic, who we talked about in our first step here. A more positive style may be the consultative style. Okay. To consult means to kind of work together a little bit with the people. And the consultative style will be that the employees gain some confidence in the decision making But still, with a consultative style, all major decisions are made by that leader. Okay, so consultative, as I kind of look like this, it's like, hey, we're consulting the employees, we're getting their opinion, we're not leading by use of punishment and threats. However, at the end of it, the leader is still making the major decision in that case, as you can kind of tell. Finally, we have participative. This is our fourth and final one here. Participative operates much more on the basis of trust and responsibility of the employees. In this case, the employees are brought in to participate in the decision making process. And key point here, the decision making is spread more evenly across the organization. You can imagine more people being more happy under this participative type of option instead of something like that benevolent autocratic or something else, because they get to be more involved with the decision making here. It's not the leader just making the sole decision like it was pretty much in the first three. Really, we're involving the employees themselves to be making more of a decision when it comes to participative. Okay, now we're going to move on to our leadership grid. Many of you have probably seen this leadership grid. Okay, there's four boxes basically. On your x axis. You have a scale from 1 to 9, one being very low concern for the production or results of the business, 9 being highly concerned for production and results. Then on the y axis, you're going to be your concern for people, okay? 1 being very low concern for people and 9 being very high concern for people. So, what we can do is take different leadership styles and place them somewhere on this grid based on how much that they care about these things. I would just like to introduce each of these different leadership styles, give you some memory tricks for going through to remember all of them. And we're going to start out with the lowest of the low and move up to the highest of the high. Let's focus on performance to start. An impoverished manager is your first one here. An impoverished manager is going to be someone who is a 1 1. And what that means is they have 1, the lowest level of care for performance of the business, and 1, they have the lowest level of care for the employees that they work with. So basically, low concern for the business, low concern for employees. Okay. Now, that's not going to be a very productive leadership style, right? Let's work through some other ones that may be similar. Another one with very low concern for performance is the country club manager, okay? Picture a country club manager guy, okay? Mid 40s guy, worked at the country club 20 years. He's got a great tan. He's always drinking, walking around, talking to the country club people. However, he may not be the most focused on performance, and that's typically what you see actually. They kind of tend to be really involved on people liking them and liking the business themselves. However, they're not really focused on the performance itself. They're very accommodating, very friendly, want to make sure everyone gets along. However, they have the lowest level of focus on actually completing the objectives of the organization. So, in an impoverished manager, we have low concern for both things. And a country club manager has very low concern for performance, but has very high concern for the relationship and how people feel. Your next is going to be authority, obedience, leadership style. Okay. Authority, obedience, leadership style would be a 9 for performance and a 1 for happiness. Okay. Authority obedience would mean that the manager is very controlling, very focused on efficiency and performance, but they have a complete lack of regard for people. So we're just coming back to that authoritarian concept here where they want high performance, but they don't care if people are happy about it. Now we're starting to get some better ones here. Middle of the road manager is essentially the middle of the road status quo. They're 5 and 5, meaning they have equal care about performance that they do to people being happy, right? This manager is very much about the status quo. They want a good focus of balancing work with morale and making sure people are supported with their decisions. However, they're not willing to give up the status quo just to make people extra happy. So they want to make sure they're meeting their operational needs first, then keeping people happy. This type of manager is someone who can be pretty sound and focused in both elements, and is usually the best of the best. Our next one here that we're going to be going through is going to be a manager who really wants to make sure we have the highest level of performance, okay? And this is going to be your team management style, okay? Team management style is someone who's very sound and focused on both elements. They are a 9-9, like I said. They want to focus on involvement and contribution and commitment by developing trust and respect while trying to reach high performance standards. They want to make sure everyone stays nice and happy, but they want to make sure they meet all of the organizational objectives there. So that is the team management style that you see here. Our last few that we're going to go through will be the paternalistic manager. Now, when they're saying this, they're saying paternalistic, and I really want you to think about a parent and what a parent would do. A parent will manage and guide you along the way. They'll make sure that they're kind of asking you to stick to the status quo. They'll discourage you from asking too many challenging questions, and they want to keep things pretty normal. These managers can shift in terms of their focus. A paternalistic manager could be a 1-9 or a 9-1, where they can be highly focused on being liked, but very low focus on performance. Okay. Or it can totally shift. They're completely focused on performance and very low regard for really you as a person or what you care about, right? So this can really shift back and forth. The last one is the opportunistic manager, and this someone is someone who manipulates and exploits others. They're a little bit of a snake. This manager will shift to any type of leadership style out there along the leadership grid to do what benefits them personally. They rely on whatever approach will get them the highest level of personal advantage over others. Our final leadership theories of the day that we're going to be going through is more of a situational and contingency type of leadership style. One continuum was developed by Tannenbaum and Schmidt, if you've ever heard their names. What these theories focused on is more of a situational type of leadership. This continuum helps the managers to use it as a guide for a different situation they might need it for. I'm going to talk through the continuum with you just so you understand what's going on here. But note, you do not need to know the exact steps for exam day. Just understand the background. We'll have situations on one side of this continuum that are like emergency situations where this leader needs to only tell people what to do. Okay. They're only telling people what to do. In this case, the leader tends to have very little regard for how people feel about the situation. But the reason they do that is because they're in an emergency, they're in a crisis. So a lot of times what they're doing is they're doing a lot of telling someone what to do, telling someone who to call, telling someone what to do here. On the other side of the continuum is going to be a non emergency situation, okay? Where we have time to grow, to build the relationship, and to build up the employee. This is where the leader could do things like delegating decision making to others, right? This is where they're saying, hey, let's all be involved in the decision making, or maybe I can get other people to make this decision for me. But if you needed to take action right now in a crisis situation, that's a really bad idea. Okay. You need to be the one to say, this is what we're doing next. You have to be the teller in that case. So when we're in a not emergency, it's great just to build that relationship. But when you're in an emergency, you really need to focus on telling them, right? So after you've kind of told them, you can kind of sell that decision. You're still telling them what to do after you've had more time. You could discuss and make them understand, ask for input on the decision. You could collaborate on this decision together, or you could delegate the decision to them. It's all along that scale. Let's go through an example. Perhaps a dietitian manager is generally democratic and involves employees in the decision making process. Like I said, they're pretty democratic, so everyone's involved. However, there's moments in an emergency situation where that dietitian manager needs to take charge, taking that crisis situation on, and that requires them to shift from being democratic to being more authoritarian in telling people what to do. You see, it doesn't always have to apply towards one leadership style. Lastly, I want to introduce a complex model for leadership, and it's called the Hershey-Blanchard-Johnson model. It's known as a leadership effectiveness model that focuses a bit on situational of meeting the employees where they're currently at. A leader using this model kind of has two categories on how they work with the employee. The categories are one, task behaviors, and two, relationship behaviors. Now, a task behavior is the extent in which a leader is working with the employee on learning tasks, so more technical skills. I want to do this when I have inexperienced employees. When someone's just starting out, we really work on task behavior because I want to make sure they know how to do the job, do it safely, achieve the tasks, and keep staying productive in that case. Relationship behavior is where you're actually trying to develop a relationship and listen and facilitate and support the employee. Now, each of these is going to have a different effect here that we're going to talk about. Let's say we have that brand new employee who has very, very little skills. We need to focus on high task behavior and low relationship behavior. In other words, I need to be telling them what to do a lot more than building a relationship. Now, this might be confusing. Zach, why wouldn't you want to build a relationship? They're so new. Well, the simple point is, and we don't want to overthink it, is that the employee does not know how to do their job, right? My focus needs to be on telling them how to do their job, not build the relationship. In this case, the employee has pretty low readiness, and what I'm doing is I am telling them what to do. As an employee develops a little bit more readiness in their job, I'm going to shift gears to providing high task relationships still, but also I'm going to now give high relationship involvement as well. So I'm going to work on them getting better at the job because they're still not to a full expert level. But now I can also focus on that high relationship behavior. I'm supporting them more. Making them feel like they're doing a good job. In this case, I'm selling them on what I want them to do, right? Not just telling them what to do, I'm selling them on the why, building up that relationship once the employee is getting more to a higher level of readiness. Our next one would be an employee who is more at a moderate to high level of readiness. Maybe there's someone who has been at the job for several years, right? Maybe a couple years. They do the same thing every day. Now, with this employee, they're very good at what they do. So I don't really need to do much task behavior, okay? Low levels of task behavior is what I'm going to focus on here. But I do want to focus on high levels of relationship behavior. I want to continue supporting them and supporting the relationship to get them to buy in a little bit more to the organization, the objectives, and keeping the relationship high. Finally, is our fourth one. This is our lifer. This is the person who has the highest level of readiness, who has been with the business their whole entire life. In general, this employee is really we've already kind of established their relationship behavior, their task behavior. Okay, so us as a leader, we're going to have really low levels of task behavior because they already know how to do the job, and low levels of relationship behavior because they already have this achievement level on both sides. So, as a leader, I don't need to invest as much time in both those things with them because largely they do their job on their own and they seem happy enough to still stay here. So, you can see these different types of leadership styles can be used in different situations depending on the employee and their level of readiness. The key for you is what are going to be the pros and cons of using each of them. And that's what we're going to kind of go through as well. Now, let's apply these to some practice questions. Number one, a dietitian manager is known for maintaining excellent staff morale. She frequently checks on employees' well being, accommodates scheduling requests, and avoids confronting employees on poor performance. Recently, patient care errors have increased. Which leadership style is the manager exhibiting? Is it A, impoverished manager, B, paternalistic manager, C, team management, or D, country club management? A dietitian manager is known for maintaining excellent staff morale. She frequently checks on employees' well-being, accommodates scheduling requests, and avoids confronting employees on poor performance. But recently, patient errors have increased. So let's use A, B, C, and D to see which is our best fit. Starting with A, impoverished manager. Okay, well, the impoverished manager has low levels of focus on the employees, but also low levels of focus on the performance. This does not sound like the dietitian manager because they seem like they really want to focus on keeping people happy, whereas an impoverished manager doesn't care about that. I'm going to rule out A. B, paternalistic management. This could be it as well, possibly, because they are focused on keeping people happy, but maybe a little bit too happy. I might put a little question mark by paternalistic right now. C, team management. Well, team management is going to be the highest of the high. So high levels of performance and high levels of keeping people happy. But when I look at this, yes, they're focused on the high levels of keeping people happy, but the performance is not their concern, obviously. So I'm going to rule out answer C. Team management is not a good fit for this one. D, country club management. Country club managers want to keep everyone super happy, but very low levels of focus on performance. For this question, this seems like it fits pretty well to that dietitian manager. So if I had to pick between answer B, paternalistic, and D, country club management, I am going to pick answer D, country club management, because it's the best fit for this manager who seems to have very, very high levels of focus on keeping people happy. However, they're just really not focused on their performance, and that fits really well with a country club management style. Number 2, which leadership style describes a leader who works with employees and teams to solve problems, but all major decisions still comes from the top? Okay, A, exploitive autocratic, B, benevolent autocratic, C, consultative, or D, participative. Okay, so we talked about this with Likhart's different continuum here a little bit. So the leader wants to work with employees and teams to solve problems, but all major decisions still come from the top. Okay, so that's an important distinction. They want to keep people involved. However, it seems like this manager is still making major decisions. So for A, exploitive autocratic, the ones that want to exploit those employees, this doesn't sound like a good fit here. They don't seem like they want to solve problems with the employees. An exploitive autocratic wouldn't really work too closely with the employees. Largely, they would just be giving direction and then making their own decisions. It's not A. B, benevolent autocratic. This is one of those that still leads through punishment, intimidation. They do make decisions themselves, so it still comes from the top. It doesn't really sound like it fits well with this question number 2, but I'm going to put a little question mark by it for right now. C, consultative. Consultative is when the manager is working with their employees pretty closely. They're not leading through intimidation or punishment. They actually want to involve employees a little bit here. However, with consultative, they still make all major decisions on their end. Answer C is probably going to be a good fit for this question because it says which leadership style describes a leader who works with employees and teams to solve problems, but all major decisions still come from the top. That fits pretty well with consultative. I'll hold on to that. In D, participative. This would be an example of when a manager wants to involve employees in the decision making process, and actually, they almost delegate the decision making out to let those employees make the decisions themselves. The reason I don't think it's this one is because our question says all major decisions still come from the top. That doesn't sound like participative to me. My best answer for this one would be consultative for number 2. Number 3, 2 leadership powers that are most effectively used for compliance include A, legitimate and referent, B, expert and legitimate, C, expert and referent, or D, information and coercive. The 2 leadership powers that are most effectively used for compliance include, okay, let's look at A, legitimate and referent. Okay, so legitimate and referent. This would mean they have legitimate power kind of based on like their position, for instance, and referent would mean that they're well liked. Okay, this could be it. I'm just going to hold on to it for right now. B, expert and legitimate. Okay, so this would be someone who is going to have good expertise in the job. They know what they're doing, and they have legitimate power just based on the position that they hold, right? So that's one of those where we're like, okay, this does make a good amount of sense as to what this could be in this case. However, I'm not quite sure whether the expert is going to be a piece yet. C, expert and referent. Okay, This one I know I can get rid of because expert and referent are great answers if I want my employees to be satisfied and have high performance. That's true. But if my focus is on keeping with compliance in the workplace, that is not going to be the best fit because by being referent, you really want people to like you a lot of the time. And you really can't have high levels of compliance and be referent. Okay. You can't really have it both ways in that case. You need to make sure that you can kind of differentiate those in that case. And our final answer here, information and coercive. Okay, I think we can rule out answer D based on that because information and coercive, that's not going to be the best for compliance. Coercive is definitely not going to be something that I think of for compliance in that case. Okay, so we've ruled out answer C and we've ruled out answer D in this case, right? We've kind of eliminated those as ones that are not going to be a good fit here. So we talked through that the coercive powers we know are going to really have a negative influence on those employees, right? So the most important for compliance, if I had to guess between our final two answers here, I would say that my best answer is going to be B, expert and legitimate. Those seem like they're going to be my two best answers here. So the two leadership powers that are most effectively used for compliance include answer B, expert and legitimate will be your best fit in that case there. That wraps up today's lesson, students. I hope you watched, listened, learned, and enjoyed today's lesson. Make sure that you go ahead and like, subscribe, watch other past podcasts as we go through. Remember, passing this exam is a journey. We all need assistance along the way. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Tell other studying students. Rate, review, help spread the word. And remember, as always, happy studying to you, RD2B.